Hi again. This is going to be a two-part lecture covering Chinese Buddhism. The first part of this lecture will begin by taking a look at the origins of Buddhism in China, and then go into two of the four main schools of Chinese Buddhism. And then the second lecture, the second part of this lecture, will then cover the remaining two schools of Buddhism and touch on modern forms of Buddhism in China today. So as we go through this, know that there's going to be two videos as a part of this lecture, so we don't have to, it won't be one, because I think this is going to be a pretty long lecture. I want to break it up for you guys. So let's start off by talking about Buddhism expanding into China. Now, if you guys remember from a couple weeks back, I talked about King Asoka. Now, King Ashoka, as he was expanding his area and expanding his territories, he also sent Buddhist missionaries to Central Asia. That was where he was expanding his empire. Now, some of these inscriptions that Ashoka was putting out on all these territories, the Dharma that he was putting up all over the place, could even be found as far as Afghanistan. And actually, they're uncovering some of these. Unfortunately, these Buddhist images as a result of some of the destruction that ISIS is causing in some of these regions, or some of the other extremist views who are destroying some of these ancient Buddhist texts that have been covered up for centuries and now are unfortunately being destroyed. So we know that there's been history of the Ashokan Empire reaching as far as Afghanistan and even into Iran, and this is where some of that initial portions of Buddhism, which eventually made it to the Silk Road and then going into the rest of China, originated. So Ashoka's son, named Kustana, established the Khotan Kingdom, which ruled from Central Asia into the middle part of the 3rd century. So it was a pretty substantial kingdom during that time, and members of the dynasty converted to Buddhism, maybe by force or maybe by influence, or maybe because they wanted to become Buddhists. Nevertheless, they converted to Buddhism. Now, during this time, the Silk Road was that major trading route that connected Persia, or Iran, to China. And this is how Buddhism began to spread. It took its way, and you can see in this map here, it spread up through India and eventually made it over to the origins of the Silk Road in the east, and then went further and further west as it spread across China through that Silk Road. And it was by the Silk Road that Central Asians, many Central Asians, began to really get not only introduced but actively receive Buddhism throughout the region. But there were some roadblocks along the way. The Confucianists that were present during that time were not all that impressed with the monastic side of Buddhism. They thought that, because Confucianism is heavily built upon the family system, and for monastics who have kind of renounced this family system, that are mostly about trying to focus on the individual and kind of shunning away from the family responsibilities, they felt that this was something that was going against Confucian values, that was beneficial for the overall community. So there was a little bit of resistance there. They also felt that some of the importance of ancestor veneration within Confucianism was not being very well adhered to within Buddhism when we're focusing less on how you're providing filial piety and more on how you can focus on here and now within Buddhism. That was also seen as something that was a stumbling block and should be resisted. Now, over time, Buddhism came to kind of envelop some of these characteristics and bring them in to the fold, if you will. But it started off, this type of cultural adaptation started off pretty early on within Buddhism, as religion tends to do. It tends to adapt itself from region to region to make itself relevant to that region. So there was a bit of adaptation that happened within Buddhism in order to fit within Chinese culture. And this provided us an experience of interdependence between the phenomena of living out of that experience and also the simplicity that comes in the natural daily life that people have on a regular basis. So with Confucian virtues such as human perfectibility, sagehood, and social harmony, these corresponded with some of the characteristics found in Buddhism, such as the Bodhisattva path, which is one that's compassionate towards others, and the universal ideal of Buddhahood, which then again promotes a sense of equality for everyone, and also the idea of contributing to the social good was found to be a very positive thing or harmonious thing within the Confucian values. So you have, excuse me, you have a little bit of both going on here. A little bit of resistance at first, but as Buddhism began to change to adapt to Chinese cultures and values, it then was able to be brought into the fold and received quite welcome within China and the rest of Asia. So over the next few centuries within China, you begin to have some of the early Buddhist intellectuals start to use some of their own nomenclature and ideas to help give substance or substantiate Buddhism and Buddhist thought. And right around the 4th century, you have a number of Buddhist intellectuals who use various Taoist terms and concepts to relate to the various ways of expressing Buddhist ideas. Now, some of the early Chinese understandings of the Buddha nature was heavily influenced by Taoism. And within Taoism, it said that the essence of all things is the Tao itself. Now, the Tao, as it was explained, was this type of inner spirit of light that manifests the power of the Tao. It's like it's the creative source of the universe that connects everything in the universe. It's like the Force. Again, I like to use that reference to Star Wars here. The Force that kind of creatively brings everyone together, but also allows for things to move and flow freely. One of my favorite ways of explaining it is very similar to the way Bruce Lee explains it a couple decades ago. And he likened it to water. And there's a clip here I want you to make sure you guys click on to take a look at. And I love it. I love Bruce Lee. I love this whole genre here, and I love how it kind of all ties together. But in this idea is the emptiness is understood, like the Buddhist idea of emptiness is understood to be like the Tao, the casual source of formless essence of all phenomena. Like water. It's formless, it's shapeless, and yet it's very powerful. And it doesn't really have any shape or form until it's put into something to give it that. So in essence, it is emptiness. water, or like the Tao. So, as an essence, emptiness is non-being. But in its functioning of dependent arising, it takes form as being, just like water. Pretty cool. Now, you also had a little bit of resistance to this concept, where there is this one scholar named Dao An who thought that Taoism could distort Buddhism and that they should remain separate. But there was another scholar a couple decades later named Kumara Jiva, who argued that the Buddha nature should be understood as a universal or a single universal reality that exists in all reality and is the same in all things. So it's what binds everything together, like the force, like the Tao. And so that the Buddha nature cannot be grasped gradually, but only at once, like in a single stroke of sudden awakening. And this contributed to the thought of Buddhism throughout all of these stages, this idea of a unified system, but also one that can come from a single stroke, from a very quick, sudden awakening, just from realizing quite clearly, almost like an epiphany, about the true nature of the universe. So, again, kind of like the way Neo finally experienced it after kind of having that near-death experience. He just, boom, understood the matrix that existed in all things and a part of all things. And it was a flashpoint understanding for him. So that's some of the ways that Buddhism was being transformed and acculturated within the Chinese way of thought. So over time, you have a number of schools that begin to develop within China. And these are quite distinct and creative forms of enculturated Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, that are different from maybe other areas that have come from before. They have roots to previous forms of Buddhism, but they are indeed having their own school of thought that has very Chinese influences within it. And they define the particular Chinese experience of Buddhism. And we'll talk about each four of these throughout these next two lectures here. So for the first lecture, we'll be talking about the Heavenly Terrace School, otherwise known as Tian Tai School, and also the Flower Garland School, otherwise known as the Huayan School. And the next lecture, we'll talk about the Meditation School, otherwise known as Chan School or Chana School. And then we'll talk about the Pure Land School, the Zhongtu School. We talked a little bit about Pure Land Buddhism in the previous lecture, but we're going to talk about Chinese Pure Land Buddhism. So the first school we'll discuss is the Heavenly Terrace School, otherwise known as the Tian Tai School. Now, this school gets its name from the mountain where it originated. So the Tian Tai movement, it's up in the hills, up like kind of like what you would see in like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, way up in the high mountains, covered in a mist of fog and mystery. It's this high terrace, heavenly school of learning Buddhism. It was founded by Hui Wen, who is considered the first patriarch, but it was really developed and crafted by the many teachings of Hui Xi, who really began to develop the school. Then later on, Ji Yi sought to reconcile and synthesize the various Buddhist teachings and really emphasized the Lotus Sutra notion of Ikeyana, otherwise known as the one vehicle. So this one vehicle is a way of unifying the understandings of Buddhism. So Ji Yi taught the essential message of Buddhism, which was the universal Buddha nature, was most clearly expressed in the Lotus Sutra. This is why he used that Lotus Sutra as a primary viewpoint to shape the school. Now, he taught that, there's all these different schools and texts that exist, and they don't really contradict each other, but rather they complement each other in a way that each blend into a harmony of different perspectives on the one Buddha Dharma. So yes, there's all these different schools, these different philosophies that are found within Buddhism, and they shouldn't be competing with each other. They should be seen as a body of work which gives you the true understanding of the one Buddha Dharma. So you need to see it as a cohesive piece. And he felt that the Lotus Sutra most fully realizes the purpose of the Buddha's goal to save all living beings. Because remember, in the Lotus Sutra, it talks about, remember, this is the one where you have like the house is on fire and the father's outside talking to his kids. He wants all those kids to come out, and he's trying to get them to come out. And he uses different ways of getting them out there, like enticing them out. But they don't know why they're coming, why they're in such a need, why they're potentially in so much danger, because the house is on fire. And nevertheless is able to come out. So regardless of what the reason is, it's important to understand the true nature of the Buddha Dharma. Now, there were other forms of East Asian Buddhism which may not have accepted the Tiantai claim of authority, but many were nevertheless influenced by the general idea that there is an eternal unity found within Buddhism. So it's that cohesive force that exists in all forms of Buddhism and in all reality. So that's some people didn't necessarily think that Tiantai Buddhism was the highest form of Buddhism, but that's nevertheless what helped potentially influence the understanding of the true nature of all reality. Now, within Tiantai Buddhism, there are essentially 3 levels of truth, and these levels of truth are not altogether unfamiliar. We'll go through each one of them here. So the first level is the truth of emptiness, that all things are empty of own being because they are all dependently arisen. The second level of truth states that the truth that all things possess a temporary existence. And again, this is due to temporary arising. And the third level of truth is that the nature of things are both empty and temporarily arising. This is known as the middle truth. Now, to behold this, according to Ji Yi, is to see that all truths are seen as one. In essence, everything is empty. And that's the true nature of reality, is the emptiness of reality, the emptiness of individual form. Now let's talk about the Tiantai views of the Buddha nature. Now, given the certain emptiness that we have within existence, the Buddha nature is not an independent thing, but it is the essence of Buddhahood seen in the phenomena of the world. So the world is not separate from the Buddha or the Buddha nature. It is a part of all things. So if everything is a part of nature, then everything is indeed empty. And like I said before, if everything is nothing, then nothing is everything. And there is no differentiation between one thing and the next. There's no form that creates that differentiates between a tree and myself and the sky. It's all one. And the way that Tiantai Buddhism expresses it in a very similar way that I've said before is through the understanding of water and waves. Now, one cannot see water in itself apart from the form it takes. Again, this is kind of what Bruce Lee was talking about before. You put it in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put it in a bowl, it becomes the bowl. So this is the same understanding for what it relates to the suchness of existence. So the Buddha nature is found when only one sees the identity of emptiness and the temporary forms of life. So Buddhahood is realized in whatever form it finds itself. It's a formless, selfless thing. It binds itself, or it conforms itself to whatever reality it is in. So all things in essence are embraced by the Buddha nature. And in this understanding, all things can attain Buddhahood. This is known as the doctrine of universal salvation. So to talk a little bit more about this idea that we all have the ability to attain Buddhahood, and that in that understanding that there's the cosmos, which is made up of 3,000 worlds, and this is it's very difficult to break down, but these 3,000 worlds are the understanding of the worlds of the mind, and that there are interpretations and unity of all worlds. So in Tintai philosophy states that there are 10 realms of existence. We talked about these earlier. It goes from the realm of the Buddha down to the realm of hell. So there's a couple more that they've added in there. And each of these 10 worlds are arisen dependently. Thus, interpenetrate each other, resulting in 1,000 worlds. Now, each of these 1,000 worlds consists of 3 distinct worldly conditions, which then result in 3,000 worlds. Now, each element of any world contains the elements of all other worlds. So again, this is getting into the architect in the Matrix. Again, if you haven't seen these movies, you need to go check that out. Otherwise, these references will mean nothing. So the architect talks about, he's got all these screens behind him of all these different possible realities that exist within Neo. So each one of them are all connected to each other. So each element of any world contains the elements of all other worlds. And these 3,000 worlds are present in one moment of thought. Therefore, all living beings, from the realms of hell to those of the Buddha, are found within the mind. So the innate suchness of all beings, the Buddha nature, and the qualities of the Buddha realms are all present in the mind. The Buddha nature can be experienced in a moment of thought, in a fragrance, in a perception of color. This is why it's so easy to be able to instantaneously attain Buddhahood, because at a moment's thought, one person can finally reach enlightenment because it finally releases that understanding of the true nature of things. So each moment of one's experience is united with the dependent arising of all forms of life in the cosmos, expressing the suchness of existence, the Buddha nature of all things. So if the Buddha nature is in all things are capable of salvation. Going back again to this idea of the doctrine of universal salvation. At a moment's notice, we can all attain Buddhahood. Very, out there thinking, but pretty interesting way of looking at it. How it's it's almost like a multiverse understanding of how the world is connected and interconnected on a variety of different levels. this now leads us to Tian Tai meditation. Now, Ji Yi established an ordination lineage and thought forms of meditation practice that would influence spiritual practice and experience within all forms of East Asian Buddhism. Now, the spiritual goal is for one to awaken to various things, such as the identity between suchness and existence, awakening to interpenetrating unity of life, the inner Buddha nature, innate purity of mind, and the spiritual journeys intended to lead one from more of an unenlightened life, which is conditioned by blind attachment to the world, to an enlightened vision of the world that brings inner freedom and outer harmony with the universe. And he did this by teaching various methods of meditation that fostered both sudden and gradual attainment. Now, the first one, the more sudden ways of approaching meditation is known as non-dual. This is where one moves beyond distinction between the mediator and the object of mediation to a more sudden experience of the Buddha nature. This is the sudden version. Now, there's also a more walking or quiet walking version of this. This is where one focuses on one's body and breathing for the gradual deepening of concentration. And then finally, you can also have meditation through ordinary events. Now, this meditation through ordinary events is using ordinary parts of your daily life as objects of meditative reflection. So as you're walking down the street, you can focus on your breathing. You're focusing on what am I doing as I'm walking, being there in the present. And all three kinds of meditation have enjoyed wide popularity in East Asia as a way of, again, tapping into the Buddha nature of all creation. So yes, you can have very sudden forms where you maybe look at a candle and you realize, looking at that flickering flame, that there is no separation between yourself and that flame. Or you have it through focusing on your breathing and concentration. Or you could also do it just by focusing on reality in everyday life. So there's different ways of gaining that that spiritual enlightenment. Let's next talk about the Flower Garland School, otherwise known as the Huayan School. Now, this was founded by Du Xun and eventually was taken over by Fa Zhang, who became the real architect of the school. And this school, the Flower Garland School, is considered to be one of the most complex and difficult to understand schools of Buddhism in the world. So it's going to be a challenge to explain how this all works. I'll do my best, though, using lots of metaphors, I'm sure. Now, this school was interested in the interrelatedness of what is called the Dharma Dhatu. Now, the Dharma Dhatu is the totality of all the cosmos. That everything is, again, interrelated, connected, and all that. And to realize the true nature of the cosmos is to realize the Buddha nature of all existence. And that Dharma Dhatu arises in an interdependence that is wondrous and harmonious. Now, when one sees this marvelous harmony that exists within the world, then one is able to generate a deeper commitment to living the Bodhisattva path in a way that embodies the harmony that you have just realized in your own daily life. So you realize the interconnectedness of all things, this web of existence that that it's almost like a string theory where there's vibrations, and all these vibrations kind of connect and interconnect in various ways as they ripple throughout time and all throughout existence. And that ripple is that Buddha nature that is a part of all things. The flower garland school explains that there are basically 4 ways of experiencing Dharma Dhatu. The first way is that of the realm of phenomena. In Chinese, that's known as Shi. Now, this understanding has the vision of the cosmos that was present within early Buddhist traditions, and particularly within Theravada Buddhism. And it works to gain nirvana by purifying oneself of the negative phenomena of one's consciousness. So it's a way of kind of removing the negative and focusing only on the pure. Now, the realm of principle, otherwise known as Li, is understanding that emptiness of all phenomena, of the true nature of things, which is found in the Mahayana works to attain Buddhahood. So it's a way of kind of revealing the emptiness of all reality. Again, the emptiness is pivotal for Mahayana Buddhism. So when one realizes the real inherent principle or nature of things, then everything is pure. So although pure and impure phenomena exist, in essence, they are empty of any independent nature. So realizing this emptiness reveals inherently that the purity of the Buddha nature is in all phenomena. So purity itself is like a clean mirror or a clear mirror. The mirror may reflect pure and impure images, but it is essentially, the essential clarity is never lost. So this is where you have that coming in. Then you move into the idea, the realm of non-obstruction between the principle and the phenomena. So this refers to fundamental Mahayana identity of emptiness with phenomena, or nirvana with samsara. This two-sided understanding of reality interpenetrates such as in a way that the essential purity and suchness is not lost. These two sides do not obstruct each other. The essence of things is always pure, while free to express on phenomena, which is preserved. This is, again, I like to bring in this notion of waves and water into the understanding of how this works. So the waves and water. So water represents the one suchness of the phenomena of being always still, and the waves represent the diverse phenomena that's always in motion. And the movement of the waves does not really obstruct the stillness of the water down below. So in essence, there are still waves. That's the phenomena that exist. But the principle of what's going on there is still water. It's still down there. And the waves are, in principle, still just emptiness. It's still part of that pure quality of whatever it is. So this is the heart of the Tiantai experience of the Buddhist nature, and then we move into this next realm, which is the flower garland school here. So this is the understanding the realm of the non-obstruction between phenomena, the Shi and Shi. So we've gone between the Li and the Shi. Now we're getting into the realm between the Shi and the Shi, and in this non-obstruction between phenomena realm, you're not looking at the relationship between emptiness and phenomena, But in reality, you're looking at the relationship that exists between phenomena and themselves. So in this non-obstruction reality, what one is able to be revealed to the dependent arising of all phenomena that exist as a totality of dynamic interrelatedness. It's that web that exists, that everything is interconnected, and that there is this, it reveals the nature of this phenomenon of making the totality that all things are related to one another by mutual identification and mutual penetration. And this comes into two different realms. We'll talk about mutual identification first, and then we'll talk about mutual penetration. So, mutual identification is the principle that all phenomena in the cosmos are dependently arisen simultaneously. So, each phenomenon provides conditions for arising of the whole cosmos. And in the particular totality of the cosmos is dependent on the condition which has been provided by all its parts. So everything is almost like a house of cards, if you will. If you remove one of those cards, the whole thing will potentially be coming, it's supported by everything. And if you remove one of those, the whole thing could topple down. So although the phenomena may be different, such as like fire and ice, they are actually identical in terms of their mutually conditioned roles. They are mutually with each other in providing the conditions for dependent arising and the totality of the cosmos. So you must have one and the other. There cannot be one without this. Again, it's kind of like Star Wars here. It's like the Force. You cannot have the good without the bad. You cannot have the dark side without the light. They have to be able to be balancing each other, to exist with each other. There's a mutuality that exists, and even in the whole folklore of Star Wars, they even say like there must always be the master and the apprentice, and that master and the apprentice on the dark side, it continues that force. It continues that dark side on the force. So then we go into mutual penetration. This takes the mutual identification another step further. So even though forms of life are distinct, there's a distinction between one and the next, they also interpenetrate so that they contain each other. It's a little bit of Anakin Skywalker, where you have a little bit of light and dark within there. So in dependent arising, the very presence of each phenomenon influence or conditions the other phenomenon of the cosmos. It's that ripple effect, that butterfly effect, that string theory that goes throughout existence. So if one side of the existence is fluttering here, it'll experience it on the other side as well. So conditioning influences of one phenomena enters into all other phenomena, like reactions of an object entering into a mirror. So if you have a mirror here, if I make a movement towards that mirror, it'll have a reciprocal relationship in that other reflection of what's happening here. That's what's kind of going on here. Now, keep in mind, this is one of the most complicated schools of Buddhism to explain. And one way of explaining this is the analogy of Indra's net, and I'll explain that next. So within the Indra's net analogy, we can then symbolize a cosmos in which there is an infinitely repeated interrelationships among all the members of the cosmos. So it's this, as you see in this picture here, it's like this interweb of all things where everything is firing and connecting to one another like a gigantic net. And this is one way of explaining it here. Far away in the heavenly abode of the great god Indra, there is a wonderful net which has been hung by some cunning artificer in such a manner that it stretches out infinitely in all directions. In accordance with all the extravagant tastes of deities, the artificer has hung a single glittering jewel in each eye of the net. And since the net itself is infinite in dimension, the jewels are infinite in number. There hang the jewels, glittering like stars in the first magnitude, a wonderful sight to behold. If we now arbitrarily select one of these jewels for inspection and look closely at it, we will discover that in its polished surface there are reflected all the other jewels in the net, infinite in number. Not only that, but each of the jewels reflected is in this one jewel is also reflected in all other jewels, so that there's an infinite reflecting process occurring. So it's this idea that everything is seen within each other. So yes, everything is nothing, but then nothing is everything. It's what binds us all together, this connective tissue that exists within all of creation. So in essence, yes, we are all the same. And in becoming all the same, we are indeed nothing. But that sameness, if you look in depth, in great detail into who we are, who we think we are, we then must realize the interconnectedness of all things.